maximally came in government largesse, and that this has sort of laid the groundwork for him to become one of the wealthiest people in the world, if not the wealthiest person in the world. And this idea that he would at the same time flout the government, that he would sort of be indifferent towards giving an account of his actions, whether they were right or wrong, we have to find out. I mean, he has to speak openly.
He has a poor track record on fasting. He was once accused of using vulgar language, but he said the accusation was bullshit. He loves the smell of gasoline and burning oil around his motorcycles and never stops drinking Coke Zero. He hasn't learned how to walk away from a fight. He's been to hell and back more than once, bringing a few public companies along for the ride. Other clergy scoff at him. The SEC and Big Pharma try to, quote, silence him for good. But their efforts haven't had the intended effect. That's Father Emmanuel.
Growing up in Tirana, where the call to a dawn echoed from the spiraling minarets, was a powerful experience for her. Albanians were forced to convert to Islam under Ottoman rule. In 1967, under the Marxist-Leninist regime, Albania became the world's first atheist state and destroyed churches to eradicate Christianity, in a land where St. Paul once preached the gospel. Her grandfather fought as a guerrilla fighter, and her father commanded a tank brigade. When communism collapsed, there was an insurrection against the state, leading to anarchy. Albanian women are known for their resilience. It is said they are born from the barrel of a gun. As a teenager, her father was flown out of the country without notice on a military helicopter to save his life. From then on, she started sleeping with an AK-47 next to her bed. That's Presbytera Theodora.
Sometimes with a single tweet, he can control the stock market.
The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission has asked a federal judge to sanction Elon Musk if he continues to violate the court's order to appear for a deposition and a probe of his 2022 Twitter acquisition. The SEC has been investigating whether Musk or anyone else working with him committed securities fraud in 2022, as the Tesla CEO sold shares in his automaker and shored up a stake in Twitter ahead of his leveraged buyout of the company now known as X. The SEC sued last October after he missed a scheduled interview at its San Francisco office. In May, the court ordered Musk to appear for a deposition by the financial regulators regarding the Twitter deal. An attorney for Musk called the situation, quote, an unavoidable emergency in the filing. The SpaceX CEO's presence, he said, was required to oversee a launch in person due to the risks for the astronauts aboard the spacecraft.
Receiving a federal subpoena is not that much fun, and giving testimony in some room that probably has no windows for 7 or 8 hours is certainly not anyone's idea of a good time. But Elon Musk is a smart guy, and he's very experienced. This is not his first rodeo, so it surprises me that he was willing to miss a compelled testimony 3 times. I mean, first the federal subpoena, then a court-ordered deposition, and it's not unsurprising that the government lawyers would ask for sanctions. But the real question we should be asking is why? Why does he keep missing this testimony? The example or the excuse that his attorney Alex Spiro gave, that he had to be present at the SpaceX launch, I guess it's possible, but it seems extraordinary because this was his 3rd time missing testimony. And SpaceX has 13,000 employees. Was it really necessary for him to be there on that day? And he would have known days in advance, if not weeks in advance. I guess he gave the SEC only 3 hours notice before and scheduled deposition testimony and then missed it. And it's also especially surprising because apparently the SEC has been accommodating. They flew to Los Angeles at one point, I guess, to take his testimony. He didn't show up. This idea that he's flouting the government and that he may have flouted securities laws, it's, again, really surprising for someone as experienced as Elon Musk is. The public's very much so aware of the government subsidies these companies have received. It's in the many billions of dollars. There's been tremendous criticism that he sort of maximally came in government largesse, and that this has sort of laid the groundwork for him to become one of the wealthiest people in the world, if not the wealthiest person in the world. And this idea that he would at the same time flout the government, that he would sort of be indifferent towards giving an account of his actions, whether they were right or wrong, we have to find out. I mean, he has to speak openly. And on the one hand, seems to lack the courage, but on the other hand, seems indifferent. And maybe that's because he really sees himself as a government man. I mean, someone who's receiving that much benefit from the U.S. government, that much benefit from the U.S. taxpayers to build his companies, including SpaceX and Tesla, that's made him extraordinarily wealthy. Some have called it grifting the government. Why isn't he showing up to sort of give an account and speak freely? An honest man isn't afraid to speak openly and freely. And I think it's really remarkable, this sort of mistestimony, not because of the allegations. I'm not willing really to give the credibility to the government for allegations. They're just allegations. They're not proven by any means. But because of the previous allegations, which he so quickly settled in 2018. And that sort of raises a question mark for me. Why would he settle in that case? And then why would he be sort of dodging, as it were, or at least the appearance of dodging, the necessity to give his witness, his testimony in these matters? And that he wouldn't understand at least the appearance of impropriety in selling Tesla shares and how he went about acquiring Twitter stock. That is certainly difficult to understand and to believe for someone at the level he's operating at, someone with his intelligence and someone with his experience.
Musk has been criticized, including by Twitter shareholders, for waiting at least 10 days too long to disclose he was buying Twitter shares. Investors must disclose when they reach 5% ownership of public companies. Musk eventually disclosed a 9.2% Twitter stake and soon thereafter offered to buy the whole company. In July, Musk said he misunderstood SEC disclosure requirements and that, quote, all indications suggested his delay was, quote, a mistake. SEC attorneys have said, quote, Musk has now failed to appear before the SEC twice, first in September 2023, in defiance of a lawful administrative subpoena, and last week in defiance of a clear court order. The court must make clear that Musk's gamesmanship and delay tactics must cease, end quote. The filing also revealed that the SEC intends to ask the court to hold Musk in, quote, civil contempt for concealing a deposition on September 10, giving the agency only a few hours' notice that he would not appear after the SEC sent personnel to Los Angeles to depose him.
The thought that he didn't understand what a 13D or 13G was, the regulatory requirements to disclose when we have a stake in a company that's greater than 5%, really strains credulity. And to be honest with you, they're really not that hard to understand. This is a man who's had large stakes in publicly traded companies and very large privately held companies for a very long time. He must be surrounded by an army of lawyers, including securities lawyers. So the fact that he was engaging in this transaction with Twitter that ultimately would lead to, I think, purchase of 60 million shares, about $2 billion, and wasn't aware of that filing requirement, or the advisors around him weren't aware of it, really very difficult to believe. And if you look at the history of what's been going on, you have by 2018, you've got the investigative journalist and Wharton School lecturer Francine McKenna making pretty clear allegations about how Tesla was going to beat their numbers in 2018 by taking advantage of these revenue recognition models around how their vehicles were leased through their lease partners, and they would eventually claim those as sales with the right to return, which, again, seems pretty extraordinary. But I think it added $623 million, I want to say, to their third quarter results, which juiced their results, of course. And then by 2019, you've got short seller David Einhorn basically coming out and saying Elon Musk is engaged in fraud, essentially. And then by 2021, you've got an insider at Tesla filing a whistleblower report with the SEC. He submits 18,000 documents for their review. What does the SEC do? Unsurprisingly, they close the investigation. They don't depose him or ask for his testimony. They don't interview the whistleblower. And of course, they don't review the 18,000 documents submitted, which is remarkable but unsurprising for the SEC. And then by 2022, of course, you've got the full self-driving, autonomous driving debacle taking place, where there's a criminal investigation opened into the claims by Tesla and Elon Musk regarding full self-driving. They were giving the impression to buyers, prospective buyers, that they were really a level 3 or level 4 autonomy, when in fact it appears they were really at the same level as Ford or GM and everyone else, essentially level 2. And that, the dozen or so crashes which took place may be related. And that investigation apparently has been open since 2022. And then by 2023, you have their CFO, Zach Kirkhorn, I believe is his name, suddenly resigning.
So you just don't care. You want to share what you have to say.
I'll say what I want to say.
Additionally, Musk and his companies, through counsel, have stated that they have, quote, cooperated and are cooperating with the SEC in multiple other ongoing investigations, end quote. Musk has called short selling, quote, a means for, in my opinion, bad people on Wall Street to steal money from small investors, end quote. In a separate civil lawsuit concerning the same Twitter deal, the Oklahoma firefighters' pension and retirement system has sued Musk in a federal court in New York, accusing him of deliberately concealing his progressive investments in Twitter and intent to buy out the company. The pension fund's attorneys argue that Musk, by failing to clearly disclose his investments in and intentions to buy Twitter, had influenced other shareholders' decisions and put them at a disadvantage.
Spends a lot of time criticizing short sellers, but short sellers honestly do some of the best work on Wall Street, and they've been known to uncover some of the biggest frauds out there. And that's unusual in my mind because he's a free speech absolutist, so why wouldn't he want the speech including of short sellers, activist short sellers and so forth, even short sellers who maybe target his companies? And when you look at what he's claiming about the failure to file these Schedule 13s, 13D or 13G, it's really incredible. And all we really have to do actually is establish a timeline. So here's a guy who's accumulating Twitter shares, and up through, I think it was March 4th, he had purchased a significant number of shares. But does he file within 10 days the Schedule 13? No, he doesn't. What does he do the day after he's required to make the filing? I want to say it was March 15th. He buys another 60 million shares of Twitter, about $2 billion. And then when he finally makes the filing, I want to say it was April 4th, I believe, the shares jumped $10 a share, 27%. And so was that a surprise to him? I seriously doubt it. He would have known that the investing public, including these so-called small investors, as he calls them, were certainly watching what he was doing, much the way they would watch any large investors on Wall Street. Like, for example, Warren Buffett. People want to know what he's doing because they're following and riding his coattails. And if the market had understood that Elon Musk saw value in Twitter, that he was acquiring the company aggressively, and what most people would have ultimately discerned and understood was probably going to be a buyout of the company, they wouldn't have sold the shares. So when he flouts those regulatory requirements to file the 13D within 10 days, and really on the 11th day begins really the hot and heavy buying of the shares, that to me looks extraordinary to claim that that was an oversight. Did it come as a surprise to him that the shares jumped when it was finally public? He would have known on, for example, March 13th or March 12th or March 14th, whenever he could have filed the 13D or 13G on time, the Schedule 13, had it been filed on time, he would have known the market's reaction. And the allegations by these firefighters, you talk about small investors, what he calls small investors. Isn't that the epitome of small investors? These guys probably make in a year what he spends in a day. And what are they doing between March 15th and April 1st? They're selling their Twitter shares because they have no idea that Musk, as they say, is secretly acquiring 60 million shares and a savings of 200 million to himself, given the jump in the share price once it finally became public. That to me is extraordinary, that he would have the audacity to mention short sellers somehow taking advantage of retail investors or small investors. And if that weren't enough, look at his pay package that he rammed through in the 56 billion, I believe it was. Who do you think owns Tesla shares? Certainly there's institutional holders like BlackRock, Fidelity, you name it, whoever the institutional holders may be of those shares. But those institutions represent a myriad of retail investors and small investors who trust those institutions to allocate their capital for them. And then aside from the institutional holders, there's a very large number of retail investors who follow Musk. They basically worship him, they idolize him, they follow everything he says. They have no ability to read financial statements in most cases. Even if they do have the ability, they don't care to do so. They don't analyze the economic characteristics of the company. They simply believe in Elon Musk. And when he is transferring that amount of wealth to himself, he's really, really taking it from those small investors. So how ironic that he would criticize short sellers for taking advantage of what he calls small investors. I would just ask those firefighters how they feel.
Musk has said the SEC was trying to harass him, including after it sued him in 2018 over his Twitter posts about taking Tesla private. In September 2018, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission charged Musk with securities fraud for his, quote, false and misleading statements after tweeting that he had, quote, funding secured to take Tesla private. The SEC also charged Tesla with failing to have adequate controls and procedures in place regarding Musk's tweets. Musk settled to fraud charges with the SEC in 2018, agreeing to pay a $20 million fine and stepping down as Tesla's chairman. Tesla also agreed to pay a $20 million fine and put in place additional controls to oversee Musk's communications. On April 1, 2022, a federal judge ruled that Musk, quote, recklessly made the 2018 statements with knowledge as to their falsity, end quote. Comments made by Musk later in April 2022 disputing the factual basis of his settlement with the SEC likely violated the terms of the settlement agreement. Musk has reportedly declaimed against short sellers, going as far as to say they will be, quote, obliterated, and decried that the SEC doesn't pursue them. Is that true?
You know, the number one question for me is, why did he settle? Innocent men don't settle when the charges are false. Elon Musk had vast resources at his disposal to fight the SEC, actually greater resources than probably the entire budget of the commission. Not only that, but he almost certainly would have had an indemnity agreement with Tesla, and Tesla almost certainly would have had directors and officers insurance, which would have covered the litigation costs. So why would he settle so quickly and then appear to have remorse? Did he lack courage? Were the charges maybe a false flag or a red herring to direct attention away from his activities, or maybe he didn't want any further commentary in the media about what he may or may not have done? I think these are really extraordinary questions, but if you ask me, if somebody accused me of something false, I would fight the damn thing. And in terms of his commentary about short sellers, again, what a bunch of hogwash, what a bunch of nonsense. The short sellers are doing extraordinary work, and why is he so interested in stifling their speech? And in addition to that, we should probably ask even the more important question, which is, why is he so interested in destroying whistleblowers? Apparently there was a whistleblower at Gigafactory, Nevada in 2018 who had a leak, and Musk set out in his usual apparently vengeful way to destroy the man. He wasn't the only whistleblower, and it's my impression that Musk has leaned on all of them to silence them. So he has called the SEC a captured regulator, and you know what? He's right about that. The SEC is a captured regulator. But the number one question is, captured by who? Because there's another two-word phrase to describe the SEC, and that's paid access. And how is it that Musk can have this litany of apparent improprieties, which everyone from, again, Francine McKenna to David Einhorn to other short sellers, prominent short sellers like Carson Block or Andrew Left, who all seem to sort of disappear along with the disappearing of his regulatory problems. And if you look at what happened in the case of Block and Left was just recently arrested, in fact. He was a vocal critic of Tesla and a short seller of Tesla. Look at Carson Block. Last time I heard, he spends a lot of his time outside the country and has really stopped declaiming publicly against Tesla. So how does that happen? Well, in terms of captured regulatory environments, all Tesla had to do was hire an attorney like Bradley Bondi, who, as late as 2020, was seen as a contender to become a commissioner at the SEC had Trump won the election. And Brad Bondi is a former high-ranking official at the SEC, and he's part of that revolving door that takes place. And when a company like Tesla or an individual like Musk brings on someone like this, they've got connections within the commission. They've got extensive connections at the commission. In fact, Bondi was acquaintances with all but one of the commissioners and friendly with Commissioner Hester Pierce. So is it a coincidence that Bondi shows up on the scene, all of a sudden the whole thing goes away, and Musk is saying, but look, the short sellers, no one's going after them. Well, that's actually not exactly accurate, because just prior to that event where Bondi sort of helped Elon Musk's legal troubles go away, Bondi showed up at the SEC to ensure the SEC would bring charges against a very particular short seller, and he really leaned on them. And Bondi's ties to the SEC were really uncovered in an extraordinary way. His particular ties to the co-heads of enforcement, Steve Beacon and Stephanie Avakian, on the day he was meeting with them to encourage them to make a very public case. Bondi, of course, is a contributor for Bloomberg, and Bloomberg would, after the quote-unquote non-public investigation was leaked to Bondi, would incredibly publish an article on the short seller that was purportedly involved in a scheme to defraud. And this brought incredible attention away from the Tesla shorts, because this became really one of the very few cases of a short seller being charged by the SEC. In fact, it was a first of its kind case in the long history of the SEC. And if you look what happened on the very day that Bondi was meeting with Avakian and Pekin, incredibly, somebody wrote Wikipedia pages for all three of them on that very same day. What are the chances on the day that they're meeting? And that user who created those Wikipedia pages in the following 2 years after that created no other pages, actually just one page for a naval officer. And so you look at it and say, what are the chances? And we look at the IP address that those Wikipedia edits came from. Incredibly, they came from the very neighborhood and a Comcast business account where Brad Bondi's office was located at the time. So what are the chances that it wasn't Bondi or someone working directly for Bondi? I'd say it's probably 1 in a million. So these are connected individuals, and Musk is right. The SEC is a captured regulator, but the real question is captured to who? In terms of paid access, is it really lawyers like Bondi, former high-ranking officials at the SEC, who call the shots, who compel the SEC to bring cases or to drop cases? It certainly has that appearance, and it's remarkable the very long string of allegations of impropriety, and in some cases, even fraud, that have simply disappeared for Elon Musk. You know, he was accused, I want to say it was in 2022, of potentially insider trading with his brother Kimball. Whatever came of that investigation, we never hear anything about it. Now we hear about 3 different depositions missed. I would say the man, if he was honest and he had nothing to hide, why not speak out freely? Why go on a podcast
Regulatory
to make accusations against the SEC? Speak openly to the allegations that have been brought against you. But in my mind, it's a charade. It's really akin to political theater. And the idea that to get someone to that level of wealth, to that level of closeness with the government, and not just the U.S. government, but also the Chinese government, because if you look at what's going on in China, the amazing, the extraordinary, the exceptional assistance he received shortly after the pandemic to get his gigafactory online in China was unprecedented assistance.
Elon Musk's cooperation and/or technical relationships with other countries is worthy of being looked at.
You must know surely that ultimately the plan under President Xi Jinping is for all of that technology to be transferred by China. And look at the amazing amount of data that Tesla is collecting on its users. It's even collecting video footage from cameras inside these vehicles. Tesla must be aware of that. And what has he given in? What has he traded in to get to that level where he's creating such extraordinary wealth? And if you look at really what's going to happen in China, if you look at the human rights violations, if you look at the national security risks, why is that not being looked at more carefully? So when I say this is a government man, I don't just mean a government man in the U.S. This is a government man in China as well. And the compromises he's willing to make to increase his power, to increase his wealth, such that he can really stifle and snuff out critics, and he can escape any regulatory scrutiny, because really he is one with the government, actually. And there's no coincidence that here's a guy receiving billions and billions of dollars in government contracts, that means taxpayer money, to manage secret spy satellite programs, who's also working with the Chinese, who seems to probably be aware that ultimately their ideas, as has been in the past with all other foreign entities that move to China, is to appropriate that intellectual property and to appropriate all of that technology for the Chinese. Really quite remarkable to think that he would even suggest that he is truly a free speech advocate, that he is truly a free speech absolutist, that he is in any way a true patriot, and that he really cares about the First Amendment. He's absolutely right that the SEC is a captured regulator, but I'd say what he's leaving out is who are they captured to, and what does paid access really mean, because that's what he seems to have. You're going to ask me.
Who was the short seller?